I never thought I'd have a cheating wife. Stories like this always seemed like something that happened to other people, until I found her diary. If you love Reddit stories as much as I do, you're in the right place. Take a sec to subscribe. Now, let's dive in. I honestly never thought I'd be the guy writing something like this. Me, married for 10 years, 2 kids, stable life. I thought I had it all figured out. But here I am, at 2 in the morning, sitting in a dark living room while my kids sleep upstairs, trying to make sense of everything. My name's Mike. I'm 40. A regular guy, really. I work a decent office job, nothing glamorous, but enough to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. My wife, Sarah, is 37. She's beautiful, smart, and ambitious. She's the kind of person who can light up a room, or at least she used to. We've been together for over a decade, and until recently, I would have said I was the luckiest guy alive. We have 2 amazing kids, Ethan, who's 8, and Chloe, who just turned 5. They're the center of my world. Every time I hear them laugh, it feels like I'm doing something right, like all the hard work and late nights are worth it. Chloe's going through this princess phase right now, insisting on wearing a tiara to breakfast. And Ethan, he's obsessed with dinosaurs. He can rattle off more facts about them than I ever learned in school. They're the reason I push myself so hard. They deserve the best life I can give them. But lately, things haven't felt right. Sarah and I celebrated our 10th anniversary last month. We went to this fancy restaurant downtown, and she looked stunning, like she always does. But even then, there was this weird distance between us. She was polite, but it felt like we were 2 strangers trying to make conversation, not a married couple celebrating a decade together. I kept telling myself it was just the stress of life. Work, kids, bills. It wears on everyone, right? The truth is, things have been off for months. Sarah's been different. Some days, she's warm and playful, like the woman I married. Other days, it's like walking on eggshells around her. She snaps at me for the smallest things or just goes completely silent. And our intimacy, practically non-existent. I tried bringing it up once, but she brushed me off, saying she was just tired or stressed. I've been trying so hard to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, convincing myself it's all in my head. But deep down, I know something's wrong. I can't shake the feeling that the woman I fell in love with is slipping away, and I don't know how to pull her back. It all started with what I thought was a routine doctor's visit. A couple of weeks ago, I noticed some discomfort when I went to the bathroom. Nothing major, just enough to be annoying. So I made an appointment with a urologist, thinking it was probably nothing. Maybe I wasn't drinking enough water, or it was some random infection. You know, normal stuff. The visit was standard at first. The doctor asked a bunch of questions, did some tests, and told me they'd call with the results. I didn't think twice about it. Honestly, I was more annoyed about taking time off work for it than anything else. Life's busy, and between deadlines, the kids' soccer practice, and Chloe's ballet classes, who has time to sit in a waiting room? A couple of days later, the doctor's office called me back. I remember sitting in my car during lunch, half listening to the nurse on the other end of the line, expecting her to tell me it was a bladder infection or something equally boring. But then she said something that made my stomach drop. "Your test results suggest this could be related to an STD," she said carefully, her words hitting me like a brick to the chest. I froze. Wait, what? An STD? My voice came out louder than I intended, my heart pounding in my ears. There's no way that's possible. I have only been with my wife. There was a pause on the other end, and then she said, "I understand, but to confirm, we'll need you to come back in for additional STD testing. Would you like me to schedule an appointment for you?" I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing in 100 different directions, and none of them made sense. My first instinct was to laugh it off, to tell her she must have made a mistake, but I couldn't even get the words out. I don't know. I'll call back," I finally mumbled, gripping the phone so hard it felt like it might crack. "I need a minute." "Of course," she said, her tone still professional but softer now. "Just let us know when you're ready." I hung up and sat there in my car, staring at the steering wheel, my hands trembling. How? How the hell could this happen? I went over every possibility in my head, trying to make sense of it. Could I have gotten it some other way? Was it a mistake in the lab? A false positive? But the thought I didn't want to consider, the one that started creeping in like a shadow I couldn't escape, was that this wasn't a mistake at all. I thought about Sarah, about the distance between us, the fights, the nights she stayed out late for work events. My stomach churned as the doubts I'd been shoving aside for months finally broke through. Could she have? No, no way. This is Sarah we're talking about. My Sarah. She wouldn't do something like that, right? I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at my phone, the nurse's words echoing in my head. "We'll need you to come back in for additional STD testing." The rest of the day was a blur. I barely remember driving back to work. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, pretending to work, while my mind spiraled. Every little detail from the past year started flashing in my head like a movie I didn't want to watch. Sarah's mood swings, the way she'd snap at me for the smallest things, the excuses, so many excuses. She'd always been busy with work, but this year it felt different. The business seminars that conveniently popped up every couple of months. The nights she said she was working late but came home smelling like perfume that didn't smell like hers. And then there were the missed calls, the texts she'd quickly swipe away when I walked into the room. I'd told myself I was overthinking. She's just stressed, I'd thought. It's work, it's the kids, it's life. But now I wasn't so sure. By the time I picked up Ethan and Chloe from school, I felt like a zombie. Ethan was chattering about some dinosaur project he'd started, and Chloe was wearing her tiara like she was queen of the world. I nodded and smiled, but I wasn't really there. My brain was stuck on that phone call, on the nurse's voice and the impossible questions it raised. That night, after the kids were in bed, I decided to do something I'd never done before. Sarah had always kept diaries. She'd been writing in them since before we met, filling up one after another with her thoughts, feelings, and whatever else she felt like putting down. I'd never even thought about reading them. They were private, and I respected that. But now, as I stood in our bedroom staring at the stack of notebooks on the shelf, I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed the most recent one, my hands shaking, and flipped it open. At first, it was just normal stuff, notes about work, the kids, a recipe she wanted to try. But then I hit a page that made my stomach drop. It was about a man, not just a friend or a coworker, but someone she'd been with, someone she cared about. The words blurred as I read through the details, but one sentence burned itself into my brain. I can't stop thinking about him, even though I know it's wrong. I slammed the diary shut, my chest heaving. My worst fears weren't just fears anymore. They were real.
Damn, this story is crazy. Leave a comment below what you think they should do in this situation. And remember to hit the like button. It really helps boost the channel and the YouTube algorithm, so more people find us and we can keep bringing you great content. Okay, let's get back to it.
I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the words from Sarah's diary flashed in my mind. I can't stop thinking about him, even though I know it's wrong. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I sat in the living room, the diary on the coffee table in front of me, staring at it like it was some kind of monster. And maybe it was. It had taken the life I thought I knew and ripped it to shreds. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I didn't even bother pretending to be fine when Sarah called to check in from her business seminar. I kept my voice neutral, but my hands were shaking as I held the phone. She sounded cheerful, almost like her old self, and it made my stomach turn. How could she act so normal, so innocent? "How's everything there?" she asked. "The kids behaving?" "They're fine," I said. My voice felt like it didn't belong to me.
How's the seminar? There was a slight pause before she answered. Busy, lots of networking. You know how it is. I didn't know what to say to that. Was she lying to my face? Was she with someone else right now? My throat tightened as the words I wanted to scream stayed locked inside. After we hung up, I went back to the diary. I needed to know more, no matter how much it hurt. I flipped through the pages, piecing together a timeline of her betrayal. It wasn't just one man, it was several. 2 years. That's how long this had been going on. The details were almost too much to handle. Secret meetups, fake work events, even hotel stays during her seminars. And then there was one name that came up again and again. Jason. Whoever he wasn't just some fling. She'd written pages about him, how exciting he made her feel, how devastated she was when he moved on to someone else. That explained her irritability, her sudden mood swings. She wasn't mourning our marriage, she was mourning him. I felt like I was going to be sick. I put the diary down and stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. My reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger. My whole life was a lie, and the person I trusted most had been the one holding the match. For the first time, I thought, I need to protect myself, and I need to protect my kids. By the time Sarah came home from her seminar, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to keep quiet anymore. I'd spent the past few days collecting myself, thinking about the kids, and preparing for what was coming next. I'd even met with a lawyer, though I didn't tell anyone about that. Not yet. I needed to know my options before this conversation blew everything up. When the front door opened, my heart started racing. Sarah walked in with her suitcase, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked exhausted but happy, like she'd just come back from a successful work trip. The sight of her hit me like a punch to the gut. How could she look so normal when I felt like my entire world was on fire? Hey, she said, setting her bag down. How are the kids? Everything okay while I was gone? She leaned in to kiss me, but I took a step back. Her smile faltered. They're fine, I said flatly. We need to talk. Her eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. What's wrong? I motioned toward the living room. Sit down. She hesitated for a second, then followed me, her expression shifting from confusion to something more guarded. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap. I sat across from her, my hands gripping the armrest so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I could feel the tension radiating off her as I took a deep breath to steady myself. While you were gone, I began, my voice calm but firm, I found something. Her posture stiffened. What do you mean? Your diary, I said, and the words came out sharper than I intended. I read it. Her face turned pale, and for a split second, I saw panic flash across her eyes. She quickly tried to recover, her expression hardening. You went through my private things? Are you serious? How dare you? Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you dare try to make this about me. You've been lying to me. For years. Multiple affairs, Sarah. Tinder accounts. And Jason. Should I keep going? She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her face going through a dozen emotions at once. I can explain, she finally said, her voice trembling. I let out a bitter laugh. Explain? Explain what exactly? That you've been cheating on me? That you've been putting our health at risk? That you've been lying to my face every single day? Her tears started then, streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't like that, she whispered. It didn't mean anything. I shook my head and stood, my heart pounding. It meant something to me, and now it's over. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by her sobs. But this time, I didn't feel sorry for her. I walked out of the room, leaving her to sit with the weight of what she'd done. The silence in the house was suffocating after the confrontation. Sarah stayed on the couch for hours, sobbing quietly, but I didn't go back in there. I couldn't. Instead, I went upstairs to check on the kids. Ethan and Chloe were fast asleep, their small faces peaceful in the soft glow of their nightlights. I stood in the doorway of their shared room, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me. How had it come to this? How had the life I worked so hard to build turned into this? I wanted to shield them from the ugliness of what was happening, but I knew there was no escaping it now. No matter how much I tried, they were going to feel the fallout. Kids always do. The next morning, Sarah was up before I was. She looked terrible. Her eyes red and puffy, her face pale. She didn't say anything when I walked into the kitchen, just sat at the table with a mug of coffee in her hands, staring blankly at the wall. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the diary, the lies, and the years of betrayal. "Do you want to talk about this now?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, not in front of the kids. She glanced toward the living room where Ethan was watching cartoons and Chloe was coloring at the coffee table, her little tiara still perched on her head. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but she just nodded and went back to staring at her coffee. The day passed in a haze. I tried to keep things normal for the kids, taking them to the park and helping Ethan with his dinosaur project, but my mind kept drifting back to Sarah. I didn't know how to move forward from this. Every time I looked at her, all I could see was betrayal. How could I ever trust her again? And if I couldn't trust her, how could I stay? That night, after the kids were in bed, we sat down in the living room. The silence between us was heavy, almost unbearable. Finally, she spoke. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling, "for everything." I looked at her, searching for sincerity in her eyes, but all I could feel was anger. "You're sorry?" I said bitterly. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us?" Her tears started again, but I didn't care. I'd spent years putting her first, and now I had to think about myself and my kids. For the first time, I realized there was no going back. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Sarah stayed on her side, curled into herself like a shadow of the woman I thought I knew. The silence between us was unbearable. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in, and I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head, the diary, the lies, the years of betrayal I hadn't seen coming. It was like the Sarah I married didn't exist anymore, and the woman next to me was a stranger. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I got up early, careful not to wake her, and sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the backyard. I thought about the kids. Chloe had been playing princess out there just last week, Ethan chasing her around with a foam sword. That's the life I wanted to protect. That's what mattered now. When Sarah came downstairs, she looked hesitant, almost afraid. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice strained. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, trying to feel something other than anger or sadness, but there was nothing left. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and said, "We need to talk." She sat down across from me, clutching her mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Okay," she whispered. "I've thought about this a lot," I began. My voice was steady, but inside, my heart was pounding. "And I can't do this anymore. I can't live like this, Sarah. I can't trust you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. "Please, let me finish." She nodded, her hands trembling. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, the words feeling like both a relief and a dagger. "I want a divorce." Her face crumpled, and she let out a choked sob. "Mike, please, this isn't just about me," I cut her off. "This is about the kids. They deserve stability. They deserve a father who isn't drowning in this mess, and I can't be that for them if I stay." She started to say something else, but I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "You should start thinking about where you're going to stay," I said quietly. "I'll do whatever I can to make this as smooth as possible for the kids, but this marriage is done." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't happiness, not even close, but it was clarity. For the first time in a long while, I knew exactly what I had to do. And as usual, that was a lot. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. See you in the next one.